You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guests about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. When I read the most recent book from today's guest, I just kept dog-earing the pages, underlining passages, and nodding furiously as I flipped chapter to chapter. Today I'm joined by Howard Tiersky, author of Winning Digital Customers, The Antidote to Irrelevance. Howard is the founder of two companies that enable large brands to win in the digital world, from the Digital Transformation Agency and Innovation Loft. We all know classic stories of corporate irrelevance. Working to ensure fewer and fewer companies write another story like those classic cases, Howard helps some of the world's most visible brands build their irrelevance antidote. This antidote drives companies to create a customer experience that keeps customers coming back for more. Along with best-selling books and driving successful corporate reinventions, you'll find Howard frequently on stage sharing his wisdom at events worldwide. And of course, you know that along with discussing digital and CX, with that type of worldwide travel, certainly we'll get into some great travel stories as well. Howard, welcome to CX Passport.
Thanks, Rick. That's an awesome intro. Really appreciate it. I'm so happy to hear your copy of the book is dog-eared. That's exactly how I like to see it. If I see it pristine on someone's shelf, I know it's not doing its job.
If we were using video for this, I'd turn around, I'd grab it out of the cabinet here behind me and show you. There are dog ears and underlines for sure. And there was something that caught me almost right at the beginning of the book. And then that's when I knew, all right, I got something good here. You asked the question early on, do we even need this term digital anymore? And then you share a good dad joke about a conversation between two fish. It's a good question. Do we even need this term digital anymore? Does a business need to distinguish themselves as being digital?
Well, I think every business, or 99.9% of businesses, which is good enough, need to be delivering an outstanding digital experience in order to be relevant to today's customers. And of course, exactly what that means is going to vary, whether you're a restaurant or you're an accounting firm or you're a travel company or what have you. But I think that's got to be a huge priority for every business because it's a huge priority for customers today.
And that's something that you brought to bear in the book right off the bat. You're telling a story about a particular restaurant that you really enjoy in Cozumel. Tell me about that restaurant. Tell our listeners about that one.
See, and speaking of travel, I got to get back there. So, my wife and I are avid divers, and actually two of my kids now, and growing because another one's about to get certified. So those that are divers know Cozumel, Mexico very well. It's an island not too far from Cancun. You can take a boat over from Cancun, and it just has fantastic diving for whatever reason. The combination of where the waves are and the reefs are and whatnot, fantastic place to dive. And so I've been there many times, both on cruises and as you know, go for a week or so on land vacation. So there's one side of the island where sort of most of the hotels are, but then a whole bunch of the island is very natural, like in its natural state, like beaches that are the same now as they were probably 10,000 years ago, just natural beaches. And so on that side of the island, there's a restaurant on one of those beaches that I love. It's called Coconuts Bar and Grill. It's kind of a Jimmy Buffett-esque kind of place. No power, no internet to speak of. I guess they have, from the cellular, of course, and no running water, but they pull fish out of the ocean, bring fresh avocados to make guacamole, and of course, tequila.
Well, of course.
And it's just fantastic sitting out there on the sand.
And so if a restaurant like that out in the middle of nowhere, you share that even they have found their way into the digital world, because I don't carry cash. And so if I were to wander up to Coconuts, how would I possibly pay for something? And you'd mentioned they've got Square. They've got the ability to actually take a digital transaction at a place like that. And so if Coconuts in Cozumel, Mexico is taking digital transactions, I've got to assume that pretty much every company, and you said 90, I bet it's 99 point, and let's string those nines out after that decimal point, needs to as well. So how does a company get started? If they aren't there, or even if they're kind of there, if they really want to think about it, what are those 5 steps to thrive in a digital world?
Yeah. So, that's a great question. My book is all about trying to provide the answer to that question. So how do you get from where you are? And many companies are already much farther along than Coconuts, but of course they need to be much farther along than Coconuts because they may have a business much more complex than just a beach shack. But So many companies, the vast majority of large brands in particular, are not where they need to be. They're not caught up yet with the expectations of their customers, despite running hard and fast for many years to become more and more digital. And so what my book is really is a blueprint for a 5-step process to get from where you are to that point that you can truly stand toe to toe in the marketplace with any competitor and deserve the love of today's digitally centric customer. So the 5 steps, I'll just say what they are, and then we can talk about them in anywhere you like. Or the first is to truly understand the customer, because the goal of digital transformation to me, it's not just to change. Transformation means change. So I guess in theory, any kind of change that is digitally related is digital transformation. Doesn't mean it's going to do you any good, though. The key is to change in a way that's going to make you more relevant to the customer. So in order to do that, the customer is your target. You have to be able to aim. You have to understand what is the customer, what are their priorities, their concerns. What is important to them? What are their unmet needs that you have the opportunity to fulfill and make them so much more loyal? And the only way to know that really is through the right kinds of customer research. And so I spend a fair part of the book talking about that. And then once you understand the customer, or at least have a much better understanding of the customer, hard to ever 100% accomplish that. Then the next step is to map the journey, to understand what is their real current journey. Because so often we, at businesses, large companies, they have an idea of what the journey is supposed to be, but that's not necessarily what the journey actually is, as we all know. But to make sure we really understand, well, what is the experience that people are having? By the way, there's probably great things. That's mappable too. It's not all about, but also about looking ourselves in the mirror and really being real about what's the experience people have when they really walk into the store. How long does it take to get service? If they need help, how long do they wait in line? How often are they not able to find what they're looking for? How often is the product on the shelf broken or missing or misshelved, or your app crashes, or, whatever, a wide range of different moments where we let the customer down. And, on the one hand, it feels like not the most uplifting experience in the world to make sure we've thoroughly inventoried all of our flaws and faults. I don't think I'd like if somebody did that for me personally. It's like, well, Howard, you're a little overweight and your hair is thinning, and it's like, stop.
Right.
But the truth is that if we have a business, if our goal is for the business to improve, and what business doesn't want to improve, this is what our stockholders, our shareholders would ever expect. If everything was perfect, how would you improve? You'd be screwed if everything was perfect. So it's great news when you can go out there and map all kinds of problems, because then you can say, look, despite all of these problems, customers are still giving us our money today. Hopefully a lot of customers are still happy, or happy enough to come back. We have a successful business and we have all these problems. Imagine if we got rid of these problems.
I want you to keep going through the items after that, but you said something really important there, and that is you're mapping these improvement points, but it's also important that a moment that matters to a customer can be that delightful one. And so it's knowing the ones that go well for the customer too, so that we can amplify and repeat those and strengthen those. Just like any athletic coach is looking for those great opportunities to strengthen the things that are great in their team, but also looking for those, where can we improve and find those development opportunities in the team. It's exactly that in that journey mapping.
Absolutely. One of the most powerful ideas is you want to improve, build on what works. If you only focus on what's wrong, it's hard to get excited, but you look for those shining, hopefully you have a lot of them. Some businesses have more than others, but which customers are you satisfying? Which touch points are really working? Which parts of the journey do create a great experience? There's always something. There's always something good. Make sure you don't overlook that or just get too focused on the pain, because very often the next question is, well, how did we get that right? What did we do?
And let's do more of that.
Well,
exactly.
Yeah, usually, right. Exactly. Yeah. And
well, I took you off the path there. So keep giving me the rest of the 5.
So the second was to map the journey, which means both the current and the vision of what is your North Star? What should that customer journey be, so that you could unapologetically say to any digital customer, we are the best choice for you. And then the third step is to build the future, which is kind of a very broad idea. But in the book, we talk a lot about principles of design thinking and agile and other leading practices to figure out how to take that journey, which is still typically a fairly high level description, of the overall overarching story of what the customer should experience, and then break it down and say, okay, so it probably breaks down into a variety of different products. There's an app, there's a website, there's a chatbot, and some of them are back-end products, right? There's a CRM system, there's a content management system, there's an email marketing system, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we figure out what are all the parts and pieces that we either need to build or rebuild or improve or enhance or reintegrate or whatever it is, and then start to move through these things one step at a time, because you're not going to get it all done in a day or a week or a month. And within each of those discrete projects or products, go through the right steps to get the details right. Because it's possible to have the overarching customer journey right, but still have a frustrating experience. I'll give you one small example, which I talk about in the book, and it's travel related. And it's funny because I had the same darn experience again. In the book, I talk about a trip I took to China, and I was trying to scan my passport, my daughter's passport. I was on United Airlines, and they have an app where if you want to check in to an international flight, you can't do it on the website. You have to do it in the app because you can use your camera, scan your passport, and the darn thing takes forever. You're just like trying to show it your passport, and it doesn't work. You try different angles, and I don't know, it seems to take like 5 minutes of monkeying around in order to get this thing to work. And so I wrote about this in the book from an experience I had traveling to China before COVID. So I don't know when that was, 2019 probably. So when was it? 6 weeks ago, I went to Poland just before the war. And maybe it was 2 months ago now. And so once again, I'm
scanning the passport.
Once again, I'm in an Uber. And it's funny because I'm thinking to myself, I wrote about this in the book, but that was like 3 years ago. And I'm sure it's better now.
Fixed, yes.
I'm sure it's better. Nope. Same darn experience. So I thought, oh, that's oh, well. So, then I get to the airport. And so what did I wind up doing? I wound up just going to the kiosk and dealing with the person there who runs over and helps you and all that. But gosh, what an opportunity to, to fix a customer point of pain. And after all, you're international business class. I'm, relative to all the other customers, you'd think a priority, right? Just from a pure dollars and cents.
From a revenue perspective, absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, so that's the kind of thing that you got to be constantly on the lookout for. And I have sympathy with United Airlines and with any large company because there's so many facets to your customer experience, right? And so many different permutations. We're working with one of the world's largest electronics companies right now, and just looking at how they sell products, right? But like product page for a refrigerator has different features and functions and customization tools than a product page for a flat screen TV, than a product page for a massage chair or whatever else. So there's all this complexity and all these different pieces and parts. And it's hard. Another story I tell in the book is, the very short version of it is, I was talking to a doctor once, and he was talking to me about, details about like, the way that the blood is filtered through the liver and the kidneys and the heart and the lungs and, all these things that have to happen. And he finally says to me, given everything that has to happen, that has to go right in the human body, it's amazing that any of us live for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Our temperature has to be regulated.
That's
the
right.
Toxins need to be purged out. We have to be hydrated properly. And, these digital experiences, they can be like that. You can do so many things right, and a couple of things can be wrong. And people are like, this sucks. And this is the challenge.
This is your captain speaking. I want to thank you for listening to CX Passport today. We've now reached our cruising altitude, so I'll turn that seatbelt sign off. While you're getting comfortable, hit that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Love it if you'd tell a friend about CX Passport, leave a review so others can discover the show as well. Now, sit back and enjoy the rest of the episode.
Unlike our human body that we can't exit, God willing, the customer can exit that really bad digital experience and choose a different company so easily and so quickly in most industries. So that's why this antidote that we're talking about is so important. I keep getting you off track here. Hit me with the last two.
So we were just talking about the detailed building of it, and that's kind of a 3-part sequential part, right? You're gonna understand the customer, create the higher level journey vision, and then you're gonna start building all the parts. Now, while those 3 things are happening, and of course they overlap some, but it's kind of a sequential process. There's 2 more parts that really should happen in parallel. So the first thing is to optimize the present. So while you're creating this ambitious North Star vision of what your company needs to deliver to really set itself up for success in the coming decades in our digital world, there are probably it's going to take time. It's going to take time to get there, right? Many quarters, maybe many years. Meanwhile, there are probably all kinds of ways you're letting your customer down right now that could be fixed quickly. And so most successful transformations have this sort of two-track process. One is the big future we're trying to build, and then the other is let's fix all this little stuff in the short term, even if in the long run, all those little fixes are going to get thrown away because you have some larger scale transformation. And so that's the fourth, is to continuously optimize the present. And in the book, I provide a whole bunch of tactics and techniques for finding little things that you can fix and, just having a continuous hygiene process. And the last is to lead the change. And that also is a parallel process. And of course, you don't end with leadership. Leadership is really where you need to begin. In the book, we talk about it last because I believe that it's kind of helpful to first lay out everything that has to get done. And that's a lot. And then at the end say, now, what does it take to be a leader of all of this? Because, if you want to be a transformational leader, you're signing up for a much more difficult task than being a leader of a company that's essentially steady state, trying to just, climb the growth chart, trying to make incremental improvements, but you're basically an operator of something that's already defined. And when you come in to be a transformational leader to move a company through digital transformation, you sign up for a much more difficult process. And companies like human bodies, they have antibodies against the kind of change which is probably necessary. And just like with medicine, where life-saving tactics, the body will still fight. You can trigger antibodies against, you hear this all the time, people are getting an organ transplant and their body rejects it. And but then they die, hopefully not, hopefully we get another one. But so this is also a common scenario with large companies because they're not fundamentally typically built for change. And when you go to try to transform them, there's all kinds of points of resistance. So that's just one of many challenges. But that's what we talk about in the book in that section is what are all the challenges of leading change of this type and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and that organ transplant one actually resonates with me. That's a pretty interesting example. It makes a ton of sense. That is vital. It's life-giving. It's life-saving, and yet the body may choose to reject it. We may come back to that one here in a little bit, but I want to go back all the way to your first step because it really resonates with me. I'm very focused on voice of the customer, total voice of the customer, and that term is often misunderstood or misapplied, if you will. And there was a story that you told about Uni Haskell and her very first golf experience. And the light bulb went off for me on how that affects this idea of customer and voice of the customer. So how does her story apply to a company that is really wanting to understand what a customer wants in great experience?
Well, I came across the story of Uni Haskell. She's sort of an internet meme, and it was a while ago, so some may not remember her anymore. But she became famous because she was a woman living in Florida. I think she was in her 50s or something like that. She'd never played golf, and she decided she wanted to learn to play golf. She was like maybe retired or something like that. And so she went to a local golf club, and some friends signed her in, and she'd never taken a lesson. She rented some clubs, she went with some friends. They went on the first green. She put her ball down on the tee. Someone showed her what a driver was, so she even knew which club, and she swung at the ball and it flew out like way farther than you'd ever think a first-time golfer would do. It hit the green, amazingly, bounced a couple times, and then rolled right into the cup.
Oh my gosh.
The woman got a hole-in-one on the very first hole of her very first game of golf without any lessons.
Jeez. Unbelievable.
Yeah, right. And of course, probably plenty of people are seething, right? Who've played golf for
there's a lot of pounding of the dash right now if they're listening to this in their car. Come on.
Right. And I actually have to tell a new story, which will just take 1 second, which is the new version of the Uni Haskell story that actually happened to me. And so I was in what's it called? Not Sanibel Island, one of the islands on the west coast of Florida. I'm blanking on the name of the island, but anyway, so we were staying there, and for a few days, my eldest daughter, who's in college, and my wife, and we decided to go on a boat trip. These Everglades, eco tourism boat trips for the day. And one of the things they do is they take you shelling, right? So they take you to like an island. Like I hardly call it an island, like a small, whatever you call it, tiny island with nothing on it, in the middle of the Everglades, where the mangroves are and whatnot. But one of them that for whatever reason about the tides, a lot of shells collect there, seashells. So we go there. There's another travel story for you. And so we go there, and you walk on this beach, and it's literally, you're like knee deep in shells, right? There's so many shells. You're just walking, crunch, 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 all these shells. And so you were collecting shells. So I know nothing about shells, neither does my daughter, my wife, but we have our little mesh bags, and we're like, oh, pretty shell, collecting all this. So a lot of them are like small conch shells, stuff like that. Okay. So we're collecting these shells. We're there for, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes. And I see one of the shells I pick up, and I say to my daughter, oh, do you like this one? Isn't this pretty? It was a little different than any of the others I've seen. She's like, oh yeah, cool. I'm like, do you want it? She's like, sure, I'll take it. It's just one of the shells we collected, right? So we get back on the boat, and there's maybe 20, 30 other people on the boat, and the people who are running the tour, and the woman who's running the tour is some kind of like scientist, eco expert or whatever else. So Rachel's my eldest daughter, she's laying her shells out, and she's got this one shell. And I go over to the wall to just look, because there's a bunch of shells like mounted on like wood to show you. And I'm like, oh, I wonder what kind of shells we collected, just to see, oh, look, this is this kind. And so this one shell, I'd have to look it up, but turns out it says, oh, this shell, which is the one that I had given my daughter, is a rare shell and is highly prized by shell collectors. And I'm like, hey, Rachel, we found a rare shell. I'm sorry. I just had to Google it. It's called a Junonia shell. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
No, I certainly have not, but now I have.
I had never heard of the Junonia, nor did the name stay with me. So anyway, I'm like, oh, it's rare. So then the woman who is running the group sees my daughter laying out her shells, and she goes, you found a Junonia, and we're like, oh yeah. She's like, I've been looking 25 years for one of those, and I've never found one, and we're like, what? She's like, I've been running these trips for decades, and every time I'm on the beach, all I do is look for Junonia, and I've never found one, And of course, I felt terrible. I'm like, oh, give her the Junonia, I know, right? Anyway, and then everybody else was freaking out, and she posted it in our Facebook group, and like all these people who are shellers, who are like lifelong people who look for shells, they're all like freaking out online. Somehow we found this extremely rare shell. Apparently we could sell it for like $700.
Good gravy.
I know,
for the trip.
Right?
All right.
Well, yeah. Anyway, so the point is, how on earth did we do that? And how can you reproduce my success at finding a Junonia? It's the same strategy that Uni Haskell used. Dumb luck, just dumb luck. Nothing more than that. And the reason that has anything at all to do with what we're talking about here is that it's the strategy that some companies use to try to create products that their customers will love. Instead of spending time with customers, understanding customer needs, and creating products in response to their customers, they just dream up things, in conference rooms that they think they would like, and unleash them into the market. And the thing is, once in a while that works. But it's not predictable at all or reproducible. And so, but the occasions when it works become apocryphal. People saying, Steve Jobs never did any research, or, Henry Ford said you could have any color you want as long as it's black. There are these, and of course, even those stories have more nuance behind them than the meme would suggest. But, the bottom line point is that, the opportunity that so many brands, product teams, companies, what have you, miss is that when you do the right kinds of research with the customer, this is your opportunity to aim. This is how you produce predictable results in terms of the customer's response. And after all, isn't that what it's all about? I mean, if you're creating something that's customer facing, if you're creating something that's employee facing, it's about the employee's response. But whoever's the user of whatever you're creating, almost surely the success or failure of what you're building is going to be determined by their level of adoption, willingness to use it, satisfaction with it, et cetera. And yet so many products are created without extensive customer research, and sometimes with no customer research. And it's just, it continues to mystify me, because it's relatively inexpensive, it's relatively quick, and it makes such a difference in terms of the results you get. And yet it's not that nobody does it, but it's not that common, not nearly as universal as it really ought to be.
So Howard, clearly there's some travel. You mentioned Poland, you mentioned China, you mentioned Florida. You've got some travel under your belt, and I know that if you're like me, sometimes that travel's enjoyable, but sometimes you need a little rest. You need a little break, a little change of pace. So I'd ask that you join me here in the First Class Lounge. We'll move quickly here and hopefully have a little bit of fun here. What is a dream travel location from your past?
Bali.
Oh, yeah. Bali comes up a lot.
Oh, does it?
It does, and it makes me jealous every episode because I have not been there. So it just sounds wonderful.
Well, I was there so long ago. It was before the tragedy that happened in the nightclub there. So whenever that was, I was there a few years before that. So it was quite a long time ago. And I was there really only briefly. I was only there a few days, and I couldn't dive because by the time I got there, and it was like, you can't dive 24 hours before flying. And I really want to get back there because I did snorkel, and there's amazing ocean life there, but so I want to get back to another time, but it is very, very far. It's really appropriate mostly if you happen to be in that part of the world, which I have been several subsequent times, but not with enough time to stop it.
So I've had the luxury of having guests from either Southeast Asia or Australia or New Zealand, and they'll talk about, bipping over to Bali, and it just makes me jealous.
Right.
Yeah,
wow.
wow.
If you're in Australia or someplace or Singapore, it's
right.
It's not
It's
that
a
bad.
very short one. So what is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
Well, I'll tell you, many, there's so many. But one that I'm planning right now is the Philippines. Speaking of Southeast Asia, I actually have a team now in the Philippines, which over the last years have built up to about 30, 35 people. And I keep meaning to go visit them. Not only because, but it's kind of a good combo reason to go visit the team in the Philippines, but it's beautiful there and also a great diving location. So most of the places that I want to go are usually water related. I'd love to go to the Galapagos. I'd love to go to New Zealand. I've never been there. I've never gone to the Great Barrier Reef. I've been to Australia, but not to that part of Australia.
Sadly, you better hurry too, as the way that is sadly changing. So, water certainly is a recurring theme for you. I definitely hear it. Switching it up here a bit, what's a favorite thing for you to eat?
Let's see. I like cheese soup quite a lot, especially if you have the right bread with it. Dip it in the cheese soup.
Yes.
Even Panera cheese soup, which is obviously
Yes.
not high dining, but it's not very good for me. I know, but
oh yeah, that is a good one. Boy, cheese soup. I haven't had that one before. You're right. That's a good one to have as a favorite. What is on the other side though, a thing that your parents forced you to eat but you hated as a kid?
well, for some reason, I'm thinking about soups. We always had tomato soup. I was never that big of a fan. Like Campbell's tomato soup. I was never that big of a fan of the tomato soup, but I don't know that I hated it. Hate something to eat. I'm not sure I could think of something that I was ever forced to eat that I truly hated.
That's good. And I've had guests say the same thing, right? I actually ate it all, but then I also hear the other stories of, I had to sit at that table until I finished X, and I sat at that table for a long time.
My parents weren't like that.
Yeah, that's good. That is good, and hopefully you've carried that forward. So back to the travel. What is one travel item, and of course not including your phone, that you will not leave home without?
Well, of course, noise canceling headphones or earbuds for the airplanes. I don't use the big ones, but I use these AirPods, or I also have ones. I have several pair because I have ones that plug in. Because if I'm listening to something that's on the airplane system, of course you can't use your Bluetooth. Although I keep seeing the ads that they're going to be enabling more of the planes to use Bluetooth headphones with the entertainment systems, but I've not actually been on any planes that do that yet. So I guess it's coming or slowly being rolled out. But till then, you got to carry two sets of them with you, because one for if I'm using my iPad and whatnot, and one for the plugging in. But yeah, that's for sure a necessity.
Howard, you may want to go back and listen to a past episode. I actually had Corinne Strikert, and she was talking about in-flight entertainment. That's her whole business, is advising companies on in-flight entertainment. It's been doing it for decades. So you may need to talk to her about when that Bluetooth solution is coming on board and maybe help influence that into other airlines.
I did a live cast not too long ago about things that I believe are going away over the next 10, 15 years. Things like credit cards, a substantial decline in street signs I'm anticipating, things like that due to technology. One of them was airplane in-flight entertainment system.
We did talk about that. It's interesting how it hasn't disappeared yet, but then in some airlines, if you fly Southwest domestically here in the U.S. or internationally as well, there is not a device in the back of that seat, but other airlines have even put it into their new product. Anyway, so I'm doing a repeat of Corinne's episode here, but no, I want to go back to your book actually, and there's actually a ton of other areas I'd want to explore, but I'm cheating. I'm looking at the clock, and we're not going to be able to go into all the depth of them. But there's one that I do want to spend some time on, and that is that idea of culture. You talked about leadership, and that there's this idea of change and how leadership culture and all of that drives a transformation, be it digital or otherwise, forward. And you've got so many examples of companies that have had the right tactics, they've had the right ideas, but they've still failed. And I'm curious what some of the examples that you've seen where a company, they've had that right solution. They've even had that irrelevance antidote that you talk about in their hand, but that resistance to change doomed them.
Well, one that I talk about in the book is my work with Blockbuster. I saw that one firsthand. So I was hired as a high price consultant at Blockbuster when they were, I want to say, just past their peak. I forget the numbers and how many stores they had, but they were still the big Blockbuster. And this was when Netflix was, just doing DVDs by mail. They didn't have their streaming service live yet. And Blockbuster was sort of trying to compete with that. Some may remember that Blockbuster launched kind of a Netflix copycat type solution. I wasn't involved with that. What I was involved with was the streaming vision for Blockbuster. And so we worked on prototyping and doing all kinds of customer research to create a vision for what would be Blockbuster at home. What would it be like when you could just turn on your TV and stream any movie ever made, like that old commercial they used to have, right to your home. And of course, that today is how we all experience a huge portion anyway of our filmed entertainment, right? On demand in our home. And we worked with super smart people there who had a vision of the future and hired us, and we were collaborating with them. It's not like we told them. They hired us knowing that to work on this idea of a vision of streaming to the home. And yet, even though there were people there who were super smart, who had that vision, then, it's sort of like an organization like that likes the idea that there's these R&D projects going on, thinking about the future, But when we started to move it into a productionalized solution that we were actually going to sell to customers, huge resistance from the organization. And I'm simplifying a little bit, but I think Tony Robbins says something that I think about almost every day, which is that the strongest force in the human personality is the need to stay consistent with our own identity, our own conception of who we are. And Blockbuster, from my perception, having, been there for, I don't know how long did I work there, maybe 9 months or something like that. They saw themselves as a retailer. They were in the retail stores business. The people at the top of that company, before they worked for Blockbuster, they'd work for other huge, successful retail chains. And so when you started to talk about a vision of the future of the company that fundamentally wasn't about stores, it was still about the fundamental value proposition of delivering filmed entertainment to people's homes, but it bypassed the store. I think there were just, for a lot of people, that just did not compute. And that was just not the identity of who they were. It was not the identity of what Blockbuster was all about. If they were going to innovate, and they were innovating, how could we create a better store? What's the store of the future? And we kept saying the store of the future is no store. But the other factions that ultimately won out at the time said, no, we can make a better store, a store with different displays and bigger screens in the store and, more bigger candy displays and whatnot. Because in their mind, they were a store company. And I think that's, to me, like a really classic example of a company that just some people there could see where they needed to go, but they couldn't get the rest of the organization to come along for the ride.
I like how you brought that to identity. There's the element of, people just are resistant to change because it's different or that, but that specific element in the case of Blockbuster or others, that it was just outside of their identity. And we see some of the greatest transformations are those that are willing to take that identity and go somewhere completely different with it. To take the Blockbuster example, who defeated them, right? Or at least is perceived as having defeated them, Netflix, which I guarantee my kids don't realize this, that Netflix was a DVD by mail at its origin, right? It was the red box in your mailbox type idea, and they had to successfully go through that identity transformation and be able to be successful coming out of that. Man, Howard, there's so much more that I'd want to ask you, but we are out of time. But for listeners, I would tell you this: go get the book. And I'm not. There's no promo behind this. I just am telling you, this was a good book, and I really got something out of it. I guarantee you're going to want to know the Bob Newhart "Stop It" story that's in there, because we're talking about big things here, but there's some quick hits that you can do, and Howard provided a framework for that. But Howard, I do want to ask you this. If people wanted to get in touch with you, learn a little bit more, maybe advance their own digital transformation, how can they go about doing so?
Sure, absolutely. Well, if you're interested in learning more about the book, there's a website for the book. It's winningdigitalcustomers.com, obviously all one word. You can actually download the first chapter of the book for free, and it has links to all the places you can buy. You can buy the book on the website or Amazon, all the usual places you'd buy books.
Of course.
And also I'm very prolific on LinkedIn. I publish almost every day videos, document posts, other articles and things like that. I have a weekly newsletter on LinkedIn. So if you find me on LinkedIn, you can just look me up under my last name, Tiersky. I would encourage you to follow me there because there's stuff coming out constantly, including all about a Mother's Day post today, all about the women who are the mothers of our digital age, the women who don't get enough credit, who are really the people who were many of the pioneers of the digital world, people like Ada Lovelace, Grace Hopper, and others.
I haven't been on LinkedIn yet today. I've just been too occupied. I'm going to go search that out right after we finish recording this. I'd love to see that one. And heck, that could even be an entire topic for another podcast in the future. But Howard, I'll get everything you just said there into the show notes, so you don't even have to go look it up. Just scroll down and you'll be able to see how you can get in touch with Howard and grab his book. Howard, thanks so much for taking the time today. It was fascinating hearing about the 5 stages, hearing those great stories. I do hope that you get to both Bali and coconuts sometime in the very near-term future. And truly, thank you for sharing your wisdom with me today on CX Passport.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Rick. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX for CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX for CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer, every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.